So I'm kind of tired of listening to some of the Brain Pop videos, so I thought instead I would read to you today. I want to talk a little bit about the Constitution. Um, so we know that the colonists made the Declaration of Independence. That's the last thing we kind of left off with in 1776, and after that, they're just saying, okay, we're independent from England. And of course, there was the American Revolution going on during this time, and we know that we were the victorious in the American Revolution. We know lots of the names of the people who fought in the war. We did in 1776, that same year, come up with a set of rules called the Articles of Confederation um, that they were going to use to govern the government. But the Articles of Confederation just didn't really work out that well. They when we broke away from England, we didn't want a government that was so strong. So they created the Articles of Confederation, thinking that this was going to be better. Less government is going to be better for our new country. But that didn't really work out so well. The states were kind of working independently and not working well together. They had different money in different states, and somebody from Georgia just thought about Georgia. They didn't have cars and ways to drive to someplace like New York. It was so far away. So they only cared about what was going on in Georgia. They didn't care about what was going on in other parts of the world. So each state really tried to make their own laws, and they were not a united states, right? The states were not all together as one. They each had their own rules and different way of doing things. And the government really needed fixing. That really just was not working out. So after about 11 or so years later, 76, 8, yeah, 11 years later, of this really crazy government that just wasn't working for anybody, our founding fathers decided that the government needed to be fixed, right? What we were doing for the last 11 years with these Articles of Confederation were just not working. We needed to fix it. So in 1787, 11 years after the Declaration of Independence, and this was just 4 years after the war ended, some of our founding fathers, our men, got together to a constitutional convention. And it took them for 4 months, basically, to write a new Constitution. And James Madison is considered the father of the Constitution because he wrote most of it. He did a lot of studying. We watched the Democracy video the other day where they talked about um, ancient Athens and the way that they ran government there. And he did a lot of studying of all different governments around. And James Madison came up with kind of like the bones of what he thought would be a good Constitution. There were a lot of debates about what the Constitution should be. But I thought I would take out this TrueFlix and just read some excerpts from this for our lesson today so we can kind of get just a little bit of a better handle of what is the Constitution. So it's a piece of paper. This piece of paper, you can see it on the left-hand side, is displayed in a museum in Washington, D.C. called the National Archives. And this piece of paper is where they decided how everything would be governed. It says what the government can do and what the government can't do. Okay, so it did things. It created a federal government, and it created a Congress and it created different laws about collecting taxes and passing laws and about the military. It also talked about what the powers of the president would be and how to elect a president, which is using the Electoral College, which is something I would like to spend some more time on probably next week since we're coming into a presidential election. I think it's really important for you guys to learn that and understand that a little bit. They talked a lot about the slave trade. The southern states thought the slave trade was okay, and the northern states did not think about it. And then they also talked about a Bill of Rights. So the Constitution over here set up the government into three branches. It created the office of the president, who's the leader of the country, and it made a Congress with powers to make laws. And then it created a system of federal courts to try out the important laws. So the leaders of the new nation had a lot of problems to solve and a lot of arguments to settle. Should the government be weak or strong? The federal government for all of the United States. Should big states have more power than little states? And who should be counted as a citizen? The Constitution answered all these questions, but getting it right wasn't easy. And we already know that, like, who should be counted as citizens? They didn't count women. They only counted male, white men who owned land as citizens to have the right to vote. So, they didn't get it right. And things did change from the Constitution along over the years. So, some of the ways, on the right hand side, who needs a constitution? The country didn't just work right before the Constitution was passed in 1788. Here's some examples of some problems. The states would not give money to federal government, and the government couldn't pay for the army, so soldiers just went home. The states made each other pay very high taxes on goods, so it was hard to do business within the states. Down in the South, they had a lot more farms than they did in the North, so they taxed the people in the North. Pirates caught American sailors and made them slaves, and the United States had no navy to protect them. So that's some reasons why we got the Constitution. So 5 of the important people, of the 55 people that went to Philadelphia to work on the Constitution, first one is James Madison. He was the planner. He did his homework. He came up with many of the ideas from the U.S. Constitution. He used the Virginia Constitution as a model, and he pushed for a strong federal government. The smart starter was William Paterson from New Jersey. William Paterson stood up for the smaller states. Paterson wanted all the states to have the same power in Congress, and his idea became the model for the U.S. Senate. Then we have Gouverneur Morris, who was the writer. He wrote most of the final draft of the Constitution. He wrote the document's most famous words, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." And then we have the leader, George Washington. All of the delegates agreed that George Washington would be president of the Constitutional Convention, so of the team that was planning to write the Constitution. Washington was a hero of the war, the Revolutionary War, and he inspired the delegates to work hard and trust one another. He was not president yet. We didn't create the office of president just yet. And then there was the uniter, Ben Franklin. He was the oldest member of the Constitutional Convention of the 55 men, and other people listened to his ideas, and he gave a very powerful speech. And he got the unhappy delegates to sign the Constitution. So he helped unite everybody. I also like this constitutional timeline over here. So here we see in 1776, we declare independence from Great Britain on July 4th. And then we have the American Revolution, where we're fighting with England. And in 1783, the war ends. So now the United States is free. And this is the time period where we just did not have a good government in place. In 1787, finally, those 55 delegates said, enough is enough. We need a better constitution, and the Constitutional Convention takes place. It takes a year for all the states to finally approve that constitution. And in 1789, on July 4th, we started the new U.S. government operating under the Constitution. And then that same year, 1789, is when George Washington is voted as our president, our first president. Okay, so let's take a look at what's actually in the Constitution. We're going to look at this blue side over here. So the Constitution is only 4 pages long. It has an introduction or a preamble. So the introduction is just the preamble, right? That's a fancy word for introduction. So the preamble just basically says, we, the people of the United States, are going to create a constitution. And then we have the 7 articles. So Article 1 creates the legislative or lawmaking branch, which is the Congress. Article 2 creates the executive branch, which is the president. Article 3 creates the judicial branch, which is the court system. Article 4 explains the rights and powers of the states. Article 5 explains how Congress can amend, and that's a fancy word for change. So Article 5 explains how Congress can change the Constitution, because obviously these guys realize it's difficult to make these rules 200 years, and then technology and things advance, right? So they allowed for change, which was great. Article 6 says that the Constitution is the highest law of the land. And it also states that people do not have to be religious to be elected, because that was a problem with England. And Article 7 explains how the Constitution is to be approved. Once 9 of the 13 states approved it, it became our law, which took almost a year to get 9 states to approve it. Tomorrow, I'm going to share a little bit about our 3 branches of government, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the Constitution in action looks like.